Thank you so much. Good morning. It's fantastic to be back here in Sydney and in Australia. And I want to first start by saying that our thoughts are with all those who are impacted by the bushfires. I know the impact it has had on life and property, and really thank you to all the first responders and the work you're doing in the community. Today I'm going to talk a lot about technology, but one of the most fun things for me when I visit Australia is to learn about, in fact, all of the technology that's being created by the companies here. To me, technology is not something we celebrate on its own. We celebrate how that leads to impact in the broader society, and in particular, how technology is being created locally to have that impact. And that's really what, as you hear me talk about technology, I want you to really think about what you all are doing with technology to shape the destinies of your organizations, your institutions, and the people in this country as well as the world. You know, when we think about what's happening with computing, you know, we've always said we live in times where there's a lot of change, but today, as we speak, technology is getting embedded in the real world. Every place, whether it's your home, whether it's the factory, whether it's the stadium, whether it's your workplace, all of it has computing. Every industry, from the energy sector to retail to financial services to oil, is all being transformed by technology. Everything, whether it's the car, the refrigerator, are all being embedded with computing. So there is this vast amount of computing power that is being put in the real world. We describe this paradigm of technology as intelligent cloud and intelligent edge. It's that ubiquitous distributed computing fabric that's getting laid out as infrastructure in the real world that we all get to use. The real question for us is, how do we increase the tech intensity inside our organizations using this paradigm? That's how we will be able to ride this wave, right? In some sense, that's really what the entire presentation that I have today, and perhaps the entire day that you spend here, is you should be thinking about, how do you increase tech intensity? And the formula is fairly straightforward. There are two things or three things that you need to get right. The first is, you want to be able to bring in the best world-class technology as quickly as possible into your endeavor, right? The last thing you want to do is be stuck recreating the wheel. You don't want to, be in a situation where you're creating technology that's available essentially as a commodity input. So if there is world-class technology, for example, like the cloud infrastructure, bring it into your organization. Bring it in to serve your application needs, your experience needs as fast as possible. And then the key job is to build your own digital IP. It doesn't matter whether you're in healthcare, whether you're in financial services, whether you're in public sector. You want to really ask the question as to what is that digital IP you're building on top of this commodity input that you were able to bring in. And, of course, all of us have to ensure trust in technology. Right, in 2019, it's not just about the technology you build, but it's the trust around the technology you build. That's the real currency. Whether it's around privacy, whether it's around ethics around AI or cybersecurity. And it's not just us as technology platform providers. Every one of you, if you're a bank, you're a hospital, you care about trust as much as anyone else. So therefore, thinking about trust is first class as you create tech intensity. That's literally what all of us are concerned about, all of us are trying to do with technology. And that's our mission at the company. Our mission, simply put, is to empower you to create that tech intensity in your organizations, in your institutions, so that you can have that broad, deep impact in the broader society. Now, in order to do that, I want to talk about sort of the technology stack that we've built to give you that leverage, right? That first part of the tech intensity formula. What's that world-class, commodity input so that you can create technology? It's also not just about the technology itself, because you ultimately are creating solutions. And so that means we want to make sure that we are taking all of this technology, shaping them into solutions that then ultimately are driving business outcomes. But today I'll mostly focus on giving you at least the lay of the land of what that tech platform is. But I want you to be continuously thinking, not about sort of any bells and whistles of the technology stack that I'm explaining, but it's more about what you can do with it. Because that's what's going to really shape the competitiveness of your own organization and also the impact that you're going to have. So in order to get started, I also want to use some data to just inspire what's happening around us. For example, when we talk about the ubiquity of computing, these two stats have always stunned me. I keep staring at them and I sort of say, wow, this is just pretty amazing to watch. There's going to be 50 billion devices, connected devices by 2030 in the world, right? I mean, it's like there's 1 billion Windows users, 2 billion Android users, 1 billion iOS devices. But this is 50 billion connected devices. That's what we're looking forward to. And there's going to be 175 zettabytes of data by 2025. Right? So this is what ubiquity of computing is going to really deliver to us. The question is, in order to support all of this, we are building the world's computer in Azure. With Azure, we have more regions than any other public cloud provider. We sort of have 54 data center regions. We have 4 regions right here in Australia with all of the data sovereignty certifications, which is super important to us. And also, we are building out all of this with openness at every layer of the stack, right? Windows is first class, Linux is first class, Java, .NET, PostgreSQL. We have support for Kubernetes, Redshift, VMware, the list goes on. So the idea that we have that compute infrastructure, that world's computer, meeting the needs of data sovereignty, meeting the needs of certification with the openness so that you can get the highest of leverage is super important to us. Now, the question for us is we're not just stopping there, though. It's not just the cloud infrastructure itself. In fact, if anything, the most exciting part of this intelligent edge, intelligent cloud is happening on the edge. Because after all, when you think about distributed computing is not about just a throwback to the mainframe era. It's actually a move forward to actually having computing being much more distributed going forward. And the edge is a very, very important part of it. So Microsoft has always led with that. So whether it's Azure Sphere, right, that's the microcontroller that goes into a coffee machine, to Azure Stack that can be powering a factory or a store, to Azure Kinect, it's just the camera with depth sensing and skeletal understanding. These are all just Azure Edge devices that are capable of doing compute where their data is being created. And so we have an architecture that allows us to have consistency in development models, operating models, and infrastructure across the cloud and the edge to power the scenarios. Now, just a couple of weeks ago, we announced the next major step in distributed computing and hybrid computing with Azure Arc. Azure Arc truly brings to life what we describe as a multi-edge, multi-cloud infrastructure. It's a pretty big breakthrough. Instead of thinking about one cloud as a destination, for you as developers, as users of this technology, you want to be able to conceive of all of the computing that is available to you across the cloud and the edge as one fabric on which you can develop applications, deploy applications. And so that means you have one control plane for management and security. But most importantly, it's just not a compute control plane. It's a control plane that allows you to take your data wherever you need it. So in some sense, you can deploy your data assets close to your compute, and it's distributed. And lastly, it is also about building these distributed applications and doing so with real productivity. Because one of the things that is very challenging is when you say there's all this compute, to build an application, you can't have complexity. To deploy an application that needs to be debugged, you can't have complexities. And that's where we have 2 open source projects that are really taking things like Kubernetes and making it possible for developers to write the next generation of distributed applications that are deployable on this fabric. So that's what is happening across Arc. And Willows, which is a local software developer, is building out what I would say is a quintessential new workload for distributed computing. So they conceive of what's happening in a railroad as essentially a digital twin. So just imagine all the tracks, all the sensors, everything that is happening as an operation is in fact being mirrored as a digital twin. And then that digital twin is being used to, in some sense, streamline the entire operation. So if you conceive of the application of railroad management as this distributed application, then everything we talked about, whether it's Arc, whether it's these 2 open source projects called Dapper and Rudder, which allows you to really write a new application and then deploy it in the distributed way, all come to life with the power of what Willow is trying to get done in terms of really moving the frontier of how railroads are managed. Another great example, which I got to learn last night about, is the New South Wales health pathology. I believe something like 61 million tests are done by this organization each year. And in fact, there's 25,000 clinicians in 200 plus locations. It's one of the largest such operation in the world. And so they've created basically a point-of-care device. Think of it as a cloud edge device, which is now able to do these tests in a secure manner with accuracy, rendezvous all the data back in the cloud, so that then you can apply machine learning and AI on top of all of that data, improve the health outcomes, right? So that's another example of how in healthcare, the cloud and an edge device are coming together to improve the efficiency of what's happening. Now, if you go up the layer from infrastructure, data becomes the super important thing for anyone building any type of application. You want to deal with the complexity of data, the variety, the velocity, the volume of data. And we have done a lot to help deal with all of this, right? In fact, in the summer time frame, we announced some of the hyperscale capabilities. So that taking a relational database, whether it's SQL or Postgres, and being able to have that limitless scale capability. And with Cosmos DB, the support for every other type of database, whether it is your document databases or graph databases or time series databases, you have one of the richest hyperscale database infrastructures, which have no limits. But one of the things we just again launched 2 weeks ago is bringing that same cloud-native approach to analytics. So for the first time, we now have the ability to take what is structured and unstructured. That means big data and data warehousing together, along with all of the data integration into one system that gives you that limitless analytics capability. And we're very, very excited about what Azure Synapse is able to do for anyone building these data-rich applications going forward. Now, one of the things is when you have all this compute, when you have all this data, all of us care a lot about is how do I use all of this together? That is, you want to create AI or machine learning, right? Reasoning over large amounts of data using lots of compute is essentially machine learning and AI. And we have been taking an approach to democratize all of this, right? It's not about sort of looking at who else has AI. We want to make sure that each and every institution here is able to create your own AI using your own data, right? That's, at the end of the day, your competitiveness. It's not about admiring any other company that has some AI capability. It is about being able to convert the data footprint you have to be into AI outcomes for your customers, right? Your employees, because that's really what this is all about. And so to us, really building out the rich infrastructure, whether it's GPU or FPGA, so that you have the ability to bring the right type of compute to do the kind of AI creation. the frameworks, the tools, as well as the building block services, right? Microsoft has always led with being the first company to achieve human parity around speech or object recognition or machine reading and comprehension. All of that now is just available, a set of APIs to any developer so that you can incorporate it in your applications. And it is great to see even a local startup, Luma Chain, worked with JBS Australia to bring both AI in terms of cognitive services as well as blockchain services together to solve the food safety issue, right? So this is, again, tech intensity, locally in action, a large organization, a startup using essentially commodity technology to create a real business outcome that is super important. Now, one of the things, as we talk about all this technology that becomes important, and as I said earlier, is trust. And there's a broad, set of considerations, right? We have to think about AI and its ethics. How do you debias a language model? Is a real software engineering problem, but it's also a problem that we all have to face up to, ensuring that there's diversity of creators of AI, right? That's sort of the kind of things that we will have to think about. If you're going to have ethics in AI, you got to start by having diversity of teams that are building AI. We also have to think about we have to think about privacy. Privacy clearly now is being regulated to become a human right. We all have to think about that as a first-class consideration while we build our applications. But the one thing I wanted to briefly talk about more is cybersecurity. Something like $1 trillion is lost every year because of cyber issues. And the impact of cyber is disproportionately borne by small business and ordinary citizens. That's the unfortunate reality of what happens with cyber, because large institutions, large organizations spend a lot, have a lot of people and human capital to protect, whereas the small businesses and citizens are the ones who get most impacted. So that's why I think we'll have to, as a tech community, do our very best work in order to ensure that the most vulnerable of our populations are protected against any cyber issues. And to do that, Microsoft's taken an approach again to create an end-to-end security infrastructure, right? Because the issue with security is you can't secure just one room of the house. You have to have end-to-end security, starting with identity, to devices, to applications, to information and data, as well as your infrastructure. Needs to be one chain. And this is not about just having the locks in the house. It's about the ability to monitor what's happening in real time, right? If you have a phishing attack or using social engineering on a mailbox, if you have detected it, you now then need to go back to the endpoints and ensure that if anything is lingering, you can take it out. Or if you did see something, like the state-of-the-art of Microsoft Defender today is to be able to see the malware for the first time and then detect it. And then once you do that on one endpoint somewhere in the world, you then need to go back to your Office 365 tenant and remove it, right? That ability to laterally move faster than the adversary is going to be so important. And that's what we've built, the end-to-end security infrastructure. And that means it also works with the endpoint manager as well as Arc to deploy the policy side of it, right? Because it's not just about the security framework, but it's the ability to then administer the security policy on top of it. And so those are the things that we have done. And we've also done this, again, with openness. That means all of what we see, the trillions of signals, are in a graph that is available, in fact, to ISVs. I had a chance to even learn about an ISV locally doing fantastic work, especially around creating threat protection around social engineering. That's the type of innovation we want to see, where we share the signal, we allow for really defense in depth type of activity. Now, one of the other areas of the tech stack I get very excited about is developer tools. Here's an interesting fact for you. In Australia, 79% of the software engineering jobs that are open, according to LinkedIn, are outside of the tech industry, right? At least what is defined as the tech industry. And that, by the way, the crossover worldwide happened in 2017. Because if we say every industry, every company is going to be a software company, That means software developers are going to be employed everywhere. And that's why when we talk about, you have to ask, what is the technology you're building? These are the people. These are the professional developers in energy companies, in retail companies, in healthcare, in public sector that need to be super productive. And this is very core to Microsoft, right? This is how Microsoft got started in 1975, building developer tools. This is the very first set of products we built. And so we care about building the best developer tool chain from Visual Studio. In fact, this morning I got up and I was reading Hacker News, and I see, lo and behold, that Facebook is standardized on VS Code as their development tool inside the organization. It is fascinating to see even the reason why. It's because they want to really push the frontier of remote development. In fact, Visual Studio Online is a great example of it. Like, most developers are not just writing, there's a great IDE on your laptop, but your machine is really in the cloud, and that's really what Visual Studio Online provisions for you, right? Even for anyone who hacks on the weekends, this is like the godsend, because any environment you want is available to you. It doesn't matter if you're even taking a long flight over. So that's the type of productivity that we want to help create. GitHub is a game changer in terms of collaboration and culture change, because when you introduce GitHub inside your organization, what it does in terms of creating that openness, the ability for people to build on other people's work, right? That's a game changer inside your organization, as it is in the open source community. A great example of it I just got to learn yesterday is at University of Sydney. They now have one GitHub repository so that everyone across all of the departments can share. And I was reading the case study, and that's when it struck me how important it is. For example, when we say even inside of a university, it's just not the computer science department doing software engineering. In fact, some of the biggest breakthroughs that we're going to have in dealing with sustainability issues or other issues is going to come because of the multidisciplinary software work that's being done by all the departments. And that's best facilitated by actually sharing code. And so it's great to see universities even use some of what is the state-of-the-art productivity environments around development inside of their own organizations. Now, all of professional developers are not going to create the future of digital technology for us on their own. And that's for one simple fact. If you sort of think about the number of apps that are going to get created in the next by 2023, essentially the next 4 years, there's 500 million new applications. That's more than the applications that were created in the last 40 years. It's a pretty stunning thing, right? That's because increasing digitization, by definition, means you're going to build applications. And in order to build these applications, we're just not going to have enough software for developers or professional software developers. That means domain experts, citizen developers are going to create these applications. And this is another area where Microsoft's really investing heavily on what's that tool chain that allows or citizen developers, domain experts to create applications. And Power Platform is one such tool chain. And it's really taken off. In fact, one of my fun exercises is to go listen to the stories of these Power Apps champions. And it always starts the same way. Someone saw something very inefficient, decided they were going to bring Power Apps to bear on that inefficient process, digitize it, change the workflow, capture something that was not captured, it was paper-based, but make it digital. That's the empowerment that they are taking hold of. And it's fantastic to see the difference that it makes inside of the organization. In fact, just again, 2 weeks ago at our IT conference, we announced 2 new members of Power Platform, Power Automate. So that brings robotic process automation to every developer or every citizen developer, as well as Power Virtual Agents, which brings the ability for anyone to create a conversational interface. So a bot that you can create for customer service or any other type of interface that you want to have just human language as the UI. And so this is great to see. And in fact, 2 great examples, again, I got to see and learn about last night were, one is Priceline. which is a big pharmacy company in Australia. One of the things, there was one developer who decided that, the process they had to manage what was happening inside the stores, like these retail specialists would go visit stores, do a lot of manual steps, in fact, spend more time doing things like inventory checks versus actually spending time coaching the person running the store. And now they were able to build a digital application that sped up all of that so that they can now spend more time coaching the local store owner, changing the productivity profile of the entire operation. But the next example, is just an amazing example to me, which is working with the New South Wales government and a developer. One of our own employees who is working at Microsoft, Jeffrey Frost, who, I got to know his story. He works as an intern at Microsoft. We have this internship program, which is allowing him to get a work experience as well as an education to then get back into tech. But his own lived experience, having been someone who went through the foster care system, his empathy for what is needed for someone who actually is really facing homelessness has led him to build this application that really digitizes that entire process of being able to find shelter for someone who is homeless. And it's great to see again how one person's empathy, one person's ability to recognize what is inefficient and make it more efficient, must most importantly though, make a real difference to the lives of the people around us is fantastic to see. Now, going up from developers and these tools for whether it's professional developers or citizen developers, I wanted to go up to business process. Now, one of the things, as I said earlier on, is data is everything in our organizations, and more importantly, what we are able to do with data inside our organizations to create new surplus, new outcomes for ourselves inside the institutions is critical. But one of the challenges is, as you digitize, in fact, a lot of data silos get created. This stat of the fact that 73% of the data that you already have inside most of these organizations is not even analyzed, right? So this is a massive lost opportunity. And to really address this is what we're building Dynamics 365, right? We are trying to build a business application suite of the world's connected business cloud, so that you can move from being an organization that is reactive, that is just collecting data post-fact, to really becoming a much more proactive organization that is able to take data and change the outcomes with customers, build better operations, more efficient operations, change even the products, right? Things like IoT and AI are really change, and even mixed reality, right? When you can even take what is a physical process and digitize it with HoloLens. You have a new ability, unlike any time before, to turn data from just being reactive data that you collect to proactive prowess that you have, right? Your ability to predict things, automate things, gain insights and make decisions, right? That's the ultimate analytical power you need inside the organization. And that's what Dynamics 365 really does. And you see again here, amazing examples. I was, again, learning about Bank of Queensland and how they're using Dynamics 365 to transform the frontier of how they work with their customers, right? Everything from the retail side to it to customer service. How do you have one customer 360 view? That's become, like, everybody talks about having a customer view. Just deploying a CRM system doesn't do it. You have to be able to relate, for example, what's happening in customer service to what's happening in sales. If you don't do that, you really are not proactively reaching out and changing how customers are interacting. And that's the type of work that the Bank of Queensland is doing. And another example was Qantas. Now, this is an example of someone who is taking what is physical today and what is virtual and making them come together. Training is perhaps the killer app of mixed reality. especially for anybody who trains with, works with their hands on the front line, can't be off the job to get training. By mixing the two media, you're able to now have a simulator that allows you to actually train yourself while you're at the job. And so that ability to change, again, business process with mixed reality is something that we're seeing plenty of. In fact, it's pretty amazing to me. People who were not issued perhaps a laptop or even a phone in the front lines are now being issued HoloLens because of its direct, productivity gain correlation. And that's the type of work that we see. Now, the last area that I want to talk about is Microsoft 365. But to motivate this, I want to talk about a couple of statistics, which are, I think, perhaps the things that we may have to focus a lot more on going forward. If you're interrupted, right, as I always say, with all this abundance of computing around us, what is scarce today is human attention and time and how we allocate it, right? Even that question of whether we are really in control of our own time allocation. And the impacts are pretty stark, right? So if you get interrupted, it takes you 25 minutes to get back on task. And then 40% or so of lost productivity. So the question is, how are we going to redefine productivity? And that's what Microsoft 365 is all about. How do we build the world's productivity cloud so that every one of us, can spend our time on things that matter the most to us in our lives and at work and at home, right? That's really the crux of what we're trying to get done. And you do that, though, by starting by putting people at the center. And you need to have the ability to start designing the entire system by putting your interests at the very center of it. And then thinking about the experience. And so that's what we are doing with Microsoft 365. And the innovation, like if you look at last month, we had the biggest event around Surface. Our goal with Surface has been about how do we invent new device form factors, right? 2-in-1 was not even a form factor that existed, 6 years ago. And now it's one of the fastest growing form factors out there. And so we continue to innovate. The Surface Hub is a large screen device that makes collaboration possible. With Neo and Duo, we have now 2 new form factors around 2 screens. We think that that's going to be a game changer on mobile devices. So new Surface devices, new form factors are super important. Mobile productivity, right? How do we ensure everything from when I open up Outlook every morning, the ability for me to focus my attention with a focused inbox, right? Even just ensuring that you're able to filter your email inbox on things that matter most so that your attention is being directed appropriately. Super important. I start each night. In fact, last night, I was pouring through all of my OneNote notes on my phone in order to get ready for this keynote, right? That ability to organize yourself with information that is important. Very, very important stuff that we are working on. Now, also video. Now, Stream has taken what used to be a media format and making it much more first class and pervasive throughout. I sort of take a lot of my training inside, a lot of our communication and expression inside is becoming video first. And that's, again, a secular change in how people think about creation and consumption inside of even enterprise context. And then, of course, everything is about collaboration. I talked about the Surface Hub, but the idea that whether you're doing real-time document editing or whether you're doing teamwork, all of that is being built into these tools. A best example, perhaps, of all of this in action is Teams. Teams has been an absolute breakthrough product. it's a user experience scaffolding that brings four things together, unlike ever before. It has messaging, it has meetings, it has collaboration, so the ability for you to do any collaboration around any artifact, whether it's a project plan, a document, all around the context of your communications. But the most interesting thing is what's happening with workflow and business process. Because all of us are involved in our organizations around workflows. In fact, the exception handling, with all the automation, guess what? There is still going to be exceptions. And that's when productivity will matter. And so the ability for you to be able to deal with those exceptions and have that, have the richness of the business application context as well as the communications context is what Teams achieves. So these four things coming together have been a massive breakthrough. And you see that in sort of the unprecedented growth rates of Teams. And by the way, this doesn't mean you stop using email. In fact, if anything we've realized is you need more communications tools, not less communications tools. But the question is, how do you use each of these tools for the maximum benefit? Not to be distracted, but to be able to stay on task. And that's where even both the design aesthetic, the goal of putting people at the center, and ensuring that all these tools add up to give you more time back, drive productivity is super important. Even like there are subtle things, right? Whether it's on LinkedIn newsfeed or on Yammer or on Teams, where we say you're all caught up, right? That's a design choice. That ability to sort of tell you that, look, it's not about driving engagement. It's about ensuring that you're able to get the most out of what you're trying to do. That ability to stay true to that design point is super important for us. And that's what we are trying to do with Office 365 and Microsoft 365. One new area for us, which I want to talk about, is Project Cortex. Right? All this rich data that's there, people, their relationship with other people, their work artifacts, how do we turn that, right? This is your data. It's perhaps the most important database inside your organization, which is your tenant information inside of Office 365, Microsoft 365. How can we convert that into knowledge, and ever-growing knowledge? So this is where you get a piece of email, somebody has some jargon or an acronym in the email, you can instantly right-click on it, get information on it, because you're able to apply an AI model to your data to recognize what this acronym is all about. It creates even a wiki page automatically for anything that it recognizes as something that a lot of people are working on. Who knows what, who knows whom. That's the currency, right? Inside your organization, just imagine you walk in and you have software that is capable of telling you who knows what and who knows whom. That's a big driver. That's the implicit knowledge inside your enterprise. And that's what Project Cortex is trying to harmonize and deliver. And so we're very excited about how all of what's happening with Teams, Cortex, Surface innovation, mobile productivity can reshape what happens inside your organizations. Now, ultimately, though, this is all about groups of people coming together and deploying this, using it, and getting the benefits. And again, two great examples locally. Westpac is using all of Office 365 to change how they are operating internally. And in fact, there's a lot of deliberate focus on what's the cultural outcome because of all these tools, right? That's where leadership of the people in the room will matter. These are all tools, ultimately, that will be shaped because of how you use them. And that's what I think is the real focus, even for us, is how do we help you have success in shaping the cultural outcomes inside your organization? How do you break down those silos? How do you increase that collaboration? How do you have a much more data-driven culture? That's what Westpac's trying to do. And Telstra, this is another great example of how Telstra is using it, where traditionally a lot of these software tools were for knowledge workers, but not for first-line workers. But with Teams, that breaks that barrier down, because you can have a frontline person, whether it's, in this case, someone who's doing customer care or field service, are able to work, in fact, with the experts back in the headquarters to deliver better customer service, right? Teams facilitates that type of first-line and knowledge work collaboration. Again, a massive change in how you think about tools. And so this hopefully gives you a flavor for how the tech stack, from infrastructure to data to AI to these developer tools for professional developers, citizen developers, business applications, productivity and collaboration services, all can ultimately help you build tech intensity, right? That's where I want to close where I started. Our goal is to empower you to be able to create the tech intensity inside of your organizations. That means for you to be able to create that digital IP, for you to be in control of your own data, so that the surplus that you create using that data goes to you and your users, your customers, and your institution, and not someone else. That is what's most important to us. And especially whenever I think about Microsoft's mission, for us in Australia, if we can see many more startups creating digital IP, many more public sector organizations becoming much more efficient, small businesses becoming more productive, large multinational companies becoming more competitive out of Australia because of digital technology, that's when we will realize our mission. That is, you achieve your success with digital technology is the key driver for us to realize our mission. And thinking about that, I came across the work that Cicero is doing with the indigenous people, the traditional owners, and the custodians at the Kakadu National Park, and how to preserve the wetlands. And it's a great example of an institution and a group of people using technologies, whether it's AI or drones, but to preserve, in this case, what is perhaps the most important aspect of our lives, which is our planet, our wetlands, and it's a great example of tech intensity in action. So I just wanted to leave you with that story, because to me, the next time I come back to Sydney and Australia, my hope is to see a lot more of digital IP and tech intensity being developed locally here, but more importantly, to drive outcomes for people in these communities as well as the rest of the world. Thank you all very, very much. I'll roll it over there. Thank you.
Ai no augdi for kunukina ngatu opir konkari iro ambiri me almangi KJP mani muna change konkani give me.
I'm a proud Larrakia man, and I work here in Kakadu as a Cultural Heritage Officer. Our country and traditional owners have always been connected. We have gathered knowledge across the seasons to listen to the country. We need to find the best ways to care for the land, using our knowledge and new learnings. Magpie geese are an indicator of the health of our country. Watching the patterns of the geese, they tell us where extra care is needed. A dense weed called paragrass is overrunning wetlands and destroying where magpie geese live. We're using drones to monitor parts of the wetlands. They help us see the areas of the park which need our care. We're combining this information with our knowledge, Microsoft AI and science to change the way we work on the ground. It's showing us new ways to manage wetlands and help the magpie geese thrive. With this information in our hands, traditional owners can be front and centre in decisions made about country. Every day, we work to look after Kakadu. We're making sure it's here for future generations.